snack.
All right, so this project is called Macatawa Strata, and I will talk a little bit about the name in a moment, but it's a community-based investigation into Lake Macatawa, which includes its history and its present. Let's see. One of the things that, it was mentioned, I work at Grand Valley, I teach some classes there, and I also am a staff member there. But I'm also super passionate about projects that are embedded in place, and I'm so grateful to be able to engage in those projects now in my hometown of Holland. So I grew up here, went a bunch of different places after college, and then eventually came back. And I went to this conference in Minneapolis a few years ago before I had moved back, and they were talking about this idea of place-based art. And a lot of times people will kind of come into a community and do their project and then leave. But we were talking about at that conference, thinking about how you can, instead of going to these like different kind of art center decaying spaces that people are find more like engaging in particular ways, instead going home and doing those things there. And I was at the time like, yes, that's what I want to do. So anyways, I made it back. But so the first half of this presentation is going to involve some of the thesis work that I did in conjunction with my MFA and getting a context for the work, and then the second half will talk about the actual events that we did as a result of this work. So you'll see me kind of reading a little bit more in the first half and then going kind of off script when I'm talking more about the events in the second half. So some of the maps and documents that you'll see here, I actually was given permission to photograph in the basement of this museum several years ago. And so I'm really grateful for these high-res documents that I now get to use in presentations. So historically, a surveyor walked a parcel, took notes, and drew maps for the purpose of charting land for the United States government. The government used these documents to understand the terrain and to facilitate seizing the land from native communities. The act of inscribing the landscape was an authoritarian act that claimed legitimacy. Imprinting spatial systemization is a dominant concern of mapping. Additionally, the issue of human agency and temporal segmentation, which affects land over time, further complicates the understanding of mapping. Claiming land is a continuous process of naming and renaming, mapping, and then remapping. The little lake in Holland was first named Black Lake on a survey map in 1834. The name was later changed to Lake Macatawa. The stated reason for this was to make it sound more unique and appealing. What are the implications of renaming a lake to make it sound more exotic for the purposes of tourism? Macatawa is a corruption of a word from a language of the people that participated in this ecosystem before European settlers infused the system. The Adawa were pushed out of the system, then a corruption of their language is used to entice tourism. Maps were redrawn when something was needed from the land. In 1849, a petition for the improvement of the outlet of North Black Lake was drawn up in hopes of obtaining money for a channel to be dug and fortified. This would facilitate commercial activity in the area. Residents carved out a channel in 1860, and because of the shifting sands, the channel was dredged frequently to continue to allow ships to pass through. Is Lake Macatawa viewed as a vital ecosystem, a toxic culvert, a place to recreate, a stolen system, a site teeming with industry, or a vacancy? Macatawa Strata aims to call attention to the various ways the lake is viewed and used. Spaces collectivize our understanding of ourselves. The way we treat the land and waterways is a reflection of our values and showcases our competency to be an ethical participant in the ecosystem. Explorers, naturalists, and surveyors have inscribed the landscape from the beginning of the United States of America, converting the experience of space into words and symbols. These practices facilitate claiming ownership of land. Lake Macatawa in Holland, Michigan is part of our ecosystem. In Holland's early years, raw sewage was deposited directly into the river and lake. A newspaper article from 1917 detailed the pollution and called for action. In 1927, the wastewater treatment plant was constructed along the lake. In 2018, GVSU's Water Resource Institute produced a water quality report and found that the lake is still in the undesirable range in many areas. The total phosphorus levels are extremely high, placing it in the hypertrophic state. This project deals with humans' relationship with the built environment and human-altered landscape. This project addresses how history, layers, and spaces, hence the name strata, so for layers, of Macatawa. And I'll now read a few excerpts from my MFA thesis to give a little theoretical context for this work. So, exploration, defined simply as observational and haptic investigation of the unknown, or approaching something as if it was unknown, is an important method for uncovering historical shifts in land use from contemporary urban landscapes. Text-based and social investigations are necessary to deepen the knowledge obtained by exploring the land. Assemblages are collections of actors, human, animal, inanimate objects that are responsible for a certain event. The term assemblages, actors, and networks are used as described in actor network theory in Reassembling the Social, and other texts by Bruno Latour. ANT is what it's called for short, is a sociological theory that considers material things and semiotic concepts to be essential components of relations. So events are often thought to be a result of human intervention, but ANT expands our understanding to include the agency of flora, fauna, and objects. So actors include human and non-human beings with the capacity to affect an event. For example, a seed, soil, electric current, or a rabbit. Humans tend to be seen as the main actors in any given assemblage, and they do possess a high level of agency, but the elements that make up the land possess agency as well. The assemblages of the contemporary Macatawa region have been composed of many beings, including Native Americans, European settlers, plows, horses, dandelions, wetland plants, soil, and crops. These entities were all involved in the transition from the unowned spaces encountered when the European settlers came to owned and cultivated spaces that make up the landscape today. So the various actors in this assemblage form an interconnected network in which the actions of one affect the overall assemblage. Non-human agency has been undermined from early interactions with the American landscape. The desire for owned and cultivated spaces is one of the ways the agency of the land has been disregarded. This practice came about in America for a number of reasons, one of which was the conceptions individuals held about the land prior to arriving in America. John Locke, an influential English philosopher during the Enlightenment, put forth the idea that was instrumental in forming Europeans' conceptions about the land, concepts that were then applied to the American landscape. Locke believed that the value of land arose from the human labor that could take place on it, and the benefits that resulted from this labor. He considered uncultivated land as synonymous with waste. Land valued for labor relates to land valued for what can be extracted from it. And then, let's see. Yeah. All right. So the project within this presentation that I'm going to focus on within Macatawa Strata is one that we did surrounding the power plant site, the decommissioned power plant site. And this is an artwork by one of the students that worked with me on the project this summer. She created this collage, and I just love the way that it really tells a story about the site, right? So in the foreground is this invasive species that's taller than the power plant drawing in the background, and then it has this kind of ghost image of a smoke coming off of it, and then in the photographic parts of it are two different fences that surround the site to keep people out of the site, both currently and historically. So the now decommissioned power plant site provided power for those of us who were Holland residents and even those of us who came to visit for 78 years. And this is an overall image of when there's actually was the piles of coal there. This arm, I'm sure if you've driven past it, you've seen that arm is now gone. It's a safety hazard, although they don't let people out on the site really, but did let us out a couple times. There are now contaminants in the soil. One of the most worthy ones is arsenic. Is in the soil, primarily more on the spot where the coal was kept. The site has sat dormant for about 6 years, and among the toxins that reside in the soil, there has also been plant life that has started to come back. So nature is reclaiming it, although a majority of the species are non-native species. And these are just some, there's a bird in the middle of that one. And the different plants have come up in all the cracks of the pavement that was out there. Some flowers and bugs. There's also a flock of geese that live out there, and they actually nest out there too, so there was like remnants of egg shells and like nests by the buildings, so definitely teeming with life. And then there's also this kind of pond creek type space where we found like tadpoles and also the dragonflies and other life that are kind of taking back this space. So humans have cultivated land for a variety of purposes. But I think the idea of like flora and fauna kind of reclaiming spaces when they're left is just really interesting to look at. I'm also super interested in the like building itself, and then some of the like indexical marks of like this is a train track that used to come in, but then it doesn't actually go anywhere anymore. And there's just like a lot of different things that are interesting to note about the site. But so the space was claimed, the structure was built. We, as a Holland community, benefited from the extraction, and now it decays. And it is slated for implosion soon as well. So it's just this kind of life cycle of this thing, and it's also something that's been kind of talked about, like what to do with the property and stuff. You know, a lot of the initial conversations were, this building is interesting, can we save it? You know, but that just, it didn't transpire, and I'm not going to go into details about like what my thoughts are on why that didn't happen, but it's just interesting to think about space and how we care for something. And I guess I'm taking responsibility here, and I don't know if you take responsibility, but I'm going to say we, and if you're not the we, then disregard it. But like, how do we take care of this thing that we did and benefited from, and then you know, laid to rest, and then now have, you know, elements in the soil that will last for however long. So this is just a little like clip of a video of just kind of the, like this idea of like nature reclaiming it. This is my last reading part, and it's brief. So curator Carolyn Christoph Bekarge curated Documenta 13 in Germany, and she was, at the forefront was the idea about the vibrancy of matter, which is something that I touched on a little bit earlier when talking about ant. And then this idea is also discussed by Jane Bennett in her book, Vibrant Matter. And so this idea that non-human matter holds agency that is often overlooked. But if we more seriously considered the agency of non-human, what would it look like if we considered the agency of non-human matter in our politics? And it was out of this mindset that Bekarge posed the following absurd yet sincere question during her talk at the Creative Time Summit in 2012. And she said, what would the world be if bees were voting? How can the bees vote? Or a strawberry? How could a strawberry vote? And she went on to wonder what a new form of politics that involves the human only partially might look like. And so now let's shift to discussing a project that we hosted at the site. A lot of the photographs that I showed, well, all the photographs that I showed previously of the power plant site were taken during initial research investigations that I went, the students and I would go out there and take photographs and do drawings and videos and things like that. But then we hosted a couple of public events where we invited people to come and make some things with us. And two of the public events were at the site, and then we also hosted a booth at the Outdoor Discovery Center's Water Festival, and had some people participate in off-site ways at that event. So at the event, we had 3 activities. So we created the plates that you see over to the side there, and you're welcome to kind of peruse those before taking off tonight. And then we also did some of the photographs, and I'll talk more about how those were created, because it's kind of a cool story about how those were created in a minute. And then we also created some maps using a template similar to the one that you found on your chair. And I'll talk more in detail about all those activities as I get through some of the slides. So the first one I'll talk about is the plates. So people were given a circle of clay and then asked to go out and press it on some of the infrastructure of the site. And so they pressed it onto the infrastructure and then brought it back to the table. So here would be some infrastructure that somebody found. And then this was just an example from another project. This is Lake Macatawa, but it's down a little ways. of like the circle on something. So that's what that looked like. And then they would bring it back to the table, and you'll notice the mold in there, and they would press it over the mold and in order to make a plate that was going to be similar in shape to everybody else's plate, right? Because the texture was going to be very different. So here's a pile of the plates at an event that a dinner that we hosted with the plates that I'll talk about in a minute. I have one more reading thing. This is a good one though. This is one of my favorite artists. So our artist Michael Rakowitz discusses his work titled Spoils in terms of the politics of the surface. And for this project, he purchased plates from eBay that an American soldier had looted from Saddam Hussein's palace. And then Rakowitz served a meal on the plates in the United States. These plates were later confiscated from Rakowitz by the US government because they were looted. And that was not it was not the material of the plate itself that was offensive to people, the porcelain, or even the glaze that covered it, right? It was the surface of it that was like the person who had interacted with the surface of it, not the like object itself. And so he likes to think of his work, that work in particular, in terms of the politics of the surface, and how. And so then I heard him speak on this, and I was already doing similar stuff to this just on my own, and I just really connected with that idea, like, can we make something that engages with the politics of surface without having it be like overtly like political, right? And not that this isn't political in its own way, but it's not as political as like Saddam Hussein, right? That's super political. So how can I use that or talk about that or relate to that in the work? So we created these plates, and they have a surface that, because they gathered detritus from the things that they were pressed on. And that is all part of the interest of the plates, right? The other activity that we did was asking people to do a little mapping exercise, which, like I said, the map in front of you directly relates to, that was pulled from that. And then also having people do their own kind of survey with it, right? So they were asked to go out and kind of look at what was in a particular spot, record it, and then move on to another spot down the line and record it. So we could have these recordings of what was there and how it was impacting people in this nice little chart, right? And then I also like the idea of how that relates then to surveying, which I discussed at the beginning of the presentation. So we're kind of resurveying, but not for the same reasons that the initial surveying was about. And then the last table that we had, activity that we had people doing, was we had these plastic cameras. They're called Hoga cameras, and they're kind of toy cameras that people love to play around with because they leak light, and you can do funny things with them because they don't quite wind in specific ways. And so what we did was we gave those out to people and let them take pictures, and then rewound the film. My student, Tess, who came up with this idea, rewound the film, and then we passed it out again at the second event. So then the people were taking layered photographs on 2 different days, and the first day was super sunny, so those are the images that are brighter, and then the next day was kind of cloudy and rainy, so those ones are a little bit dimmer. and just some of the things that people captured, and then the layering of the images was just, it was amazing. And it's so much fun to not only work with the like serendipity of a Holga camera layering with someone you've never met, but also the serendipity of giving it out to people that just are walking into your event and like seeing what they decide is worthy of photographing. And then it also had some either chemical stains or light leaks that were on the images, which just sort of added to the, like, the object of it, right? And I think that's what traditional photography offers you, is like, it's a thing at the end that you can see and touch. So it's scratched and it's got stuff on it. It was present, you know, it was present at the site. And so then the last thing that I'm going to talk about is where this stuff went. So we hosted a meal with the Holland City Planning Commission and set up the photographs. You'll notice this is like the main room that they'll have city council meetings in and things like that. So we set up the photographs on that back counter, and then also put out the maps that are in front of you in case people wanted to do a writing activity. And then we had a local Mexican restaurant cater it for us. And then I also turned the logo into a sticker that we put on the glasses. And then people got to take home their glasses and the coasters, because we have tons of those. But the plates, I'm hoping for more things to happen with them before they go on their own journey. Anyways, there's the food with a little menu of sorts to kind of describe what each element of the meal was. So there was napkins that were printed at the water festival with some different images, and there's a pile of napkins over there if you want to check them out, see all the different prints that we gave people an opportunity to use. And then the coasters were also done at the water festival, and we gave them, pass some of these around, they're kind of fun. So one of my students found these, and then we 3D printed them, and they're invertebrates from the shale layer of like ancient creatures. So, I feel like and so this was like really pushing back in history, right? Some of these invertebrates that were here, and so people took these and then pressed them into the coasters to use those as texture, and then they also pressed in some of the plants that would have been there, because the site used to be more of a wetlands type of a marsh area, and so the kinds of plants that would have been there at that time, those are also pressed into that coaster. So we got a bunch of coasters named, which is fun. Oh, so we did not find these fossils there. These fossils came from the University of Michigan's, like their archaeological office, and they have all these like 3D files that they've scanned in, and they were kind enough to give us files that were actually printable, because the ones on the website aren't. But yeah, so then we printed them that way. Yeah.
So how do you get tying into this?
Oh, that I guess goes back to the Macatawa Strata. So like, what are the layers of it, right? Like, so that would be kind of the like lowest rung layer is literally, it's a shale layer. And then it would have, yeah, and then another pre-power plant layer would have been the swamp plants. So, there's some people enjoying their food. And then another shot. So then they kind of transitioned into this like meeting about like what gas station they were going to put at the corner of 31 and Lincoln. And so then so that was, yeah. So I had to take a picture of that too, obviously. And then we're to the maps. So then I had them create the maps and then put them up on the wall. And actually I need to collect those at some point. But it's also about kind of like gathering different like ephemera, maybe would be one way to describe it from the project. So like it's all just like investigating different aspects of it and then trying to tie it all together in different ways. And the Macatawa Strata is the big thing. And then the power plant is just like one facet of that. And I did get, at the water festival, they're like, what does the power plant have to do with water? It's like, it's on the water? But I mean, and then it was like, yeah, because the only reason that it's like contested and that people want to know what's going to happen to it next is because it's like for property, right? Like, if it was in the middle of a field somewhere, nobody would care. It would just decay or whatever, you know, like it's because the downtown is changing and it's kind of prime real estate, but then it's also, and if I would have played some sound on some of the videos, you could hear like pianos in the background, like grinding away. And so it's like, well, is anyone gonna want like a high-end apartment next to that? You know, and so, and the plans are not necessarily gonna be that, but it's like appealing and not appealing, I guess. So, so I'd like to open it up for questions, and then it would also be awesome if people wanted to kind of write some words on there as described in the little paragraph about the mapping activity. So, but if you're not comfortable with that, that's fine too. But I think just asking people to think about, like, what was the power plant site? What is the power plant site? And then what is the future of it, right? And just different words to describe that. It could be more than one word, but, and it could just be a bunch of words, you know, just something to think about, like, how do you make sense of the spaces that you pass by every day, right? And that's the main premise. So, looks like Michelle's getting ready with a mic for questions. Yeah.
So what do we know of the past of that? Is that where the Harrison Cole location was?
Okay.
And just what else was there, I guess, is the past prior to the power plant.
Right, yeah, that is,
I think Harrison Cole became,
it appears like people know more than me, and that's great.
I think Harrison Cole became Verplank Cole, that location right there on the corner of Washington Boulevard and 8th, I think. And then that whole area, Pine Avenue West, was the fill-in from the 1871 fire. You know, it's just, they're Dutch, they made more land.
Yeah, it started as a marsh.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it will go back to large if we want.
Right. Yeah.
So do you know what is planned for this property?
My understanding is the current plan is, and I'm not definitely an expert, but I do have conversations about it with people, is that they're actually gonna do a land swap with the gravel piles. So they're just gonna and they're gonna pile gravel on it and then develop the other space.
So is this project part of the community planning so big potential? Was this project used for the city council to help, or whoever is developing the land or making the place develop the land, to help them decide what to do with it, or is it just sort of like a community exercise too?
I'd like to think so, but no, like not in any official capacity. And as probably as a parent with this, it's not like some succinct statement that is trying to be made, right? Like it's more about, it's complicated. There's all these different facets and it's complicated. And so I don't know that most city planners are really interested in that. It's more about how, like, we're gonna get a developer in and they're gonna build this thing and like that's gonna be what happens, or we're gonna solicit developers and see who all comes up with a plan or something. But I guess my hope for having, like, hosting a meal with this stuff, and that was the feedback that I got, was about the thoughtfulness of it, right? Like, it's clear that we like went there and researched and took photographs and like just were very thoughtful and just coming up with kind of our like visuals of what's happening there, and just conveying that, right, as opposed to being able to make some sort of like help them make a particular decision. It was just more thinking about how can we be thoughtful about these decisions and look at the complexity of the space. But I was definitely interested and wanted it to be something that went to policy and decision makers, and hopefully inspired them to that end. At the same time, when I met with Mayor Box about the project long before we hosted the meal, like him and I talked about the Civic Center redesign as a sample of what thoughtful redesign can look like, right? Like using some of the bleachers in it, like keeping some of the like main spaces like similar looking, so it's still like, even though I just drove past there today and I'm like it looks very contemporary, but it also feels like the same space. And so then after talking to him, I was like, oh, maybe he just gets it, and like they don't need us to come in with this, because that was something that he was proud of, and he even said like, oh, I have a chair in my, like I got one of the bleacher seats in my office or my law office or something, and I was like, okay, so you got it. But anyway, so it just, that's a long way to say I don't know.
Do you have any plans to expand this around the lake at all, or were you just focusing on the market site?
Yeah. Some of the sites that I was interested in the channel. That's something I touched on a little bit in the intro, and that's definitely something that I'm interested in, like rerouting the water and the channel being put in. So out by the kind of state park area, thinking about like that, and then Windmill Island is another spot that is kind of captivating in a like land alteration kind of way.
I sort of lost you when you were talking, I think you were talking about something called ANT.
Yeah.
Totally missed what that stood for. So
Action network theory.
What action
Network theory.
network theory? Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so that was where the human players would also flora, fauna, and objects.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah. Bruno Latour is a theorist. And yeah, I find his work super fascinating.
Any other questions for Sarah?
One alteration that you didn't mention, you know, so we talked about how it used to be swamp and stuff, but isn't there like a seawall? I mean, that's a significant alteration of what was and what is. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, because that's keeping any kind of erosion from happening and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely true, yes. And then when we went there on the site visit, we got access, I guess I never said this, we got access to the site through BBW. They allowed us to be there. We didn't just sneak out there with nails. But Ashley Day was the community education outreach person there. She's like, you cannot go on that wall. Like, you have to have some like certification and stuff to be out there. So she was just like, basically, don't even look at it. Like, so, but yeah, definitely, that's the thing that is doing something that's keeping it land, you know?
Did you get in the building?
No. Not at all. Yeah, I know. We did. When I went to meet with the mayor, he was like, "Oh yeah, I went on a tour of that building." But when they were doing that back in the day, and he like took like hundreds of pictures, and I was like, "Oh, can we have those?" He did give them to us. Oh, actually, I should show them. So, and then CultureWorks. Actually, CultureWorks is the one that did the registration for the event, so that we made sure that we were under the amount of people that DPW said we could have. But then those photographs, after making their way to me, then made their way to Emily, and the students at CultureWorks made some art out of some of the interiors of the building, which are amazing. So. And I did, it was really one last story that I'm going to tell. So, at the water festival, I had this gentleman come up, and he was kind of livid about the project, like that it didn't, like he's like, you're just walking around, like you're just walking around. Like, and that's like a thing that's important, and I'm like, and I like had this dialogue, so it's just like, and I like interactions like that because it makes me understand like what the scope is, or where people are at, and I'm like, because something that I feel is pretty apolitical and mundane, in some senses, is also just like rustles people's feathers, like walking around and exploring is important. And I just find that super interesting. I'm like, oh man, how can we, like, where can we go from that? But anyway, so I would like to invite you to check out some of the plates and some of the things. If it's on the table, feel free to pick it up. If it's on a stand, just kind of leave it where it's at. But yeah, if it's flat, feel free to touch it. And we've got a couple of photographs and stuff, but
perhaps sadly, I may be more in the camp of God.
yeah, I know.
And so what I'm wondering, you know, you mentioned that Locke believed that the value of a piece of property had to do with what a human could do there, what we could extract from there, what we could put on there, all of that. So I get the beauty of nature, I appreciate that very much, but what are some other things that you feel give value to a piece of property?
Well, I guess to come back to the idea of, I'm going to get on a different image up there when I'm talking about this. Maybe it's the video. So like, oh, we read the second time. It wasn't funny. With swaying flowers. All right. So, just like spaces, also just being, right? And I know that it is irrational to think that this site would just be left to kind of decay and nature would like take back over and we would kind of do that. But at the same time, I'm like, wouldn't that be cool? Like, you know, like, even though it's totally just like antithetical to how we use space and like how we go about our typical like capitalist existence, I think that there's something to just like letting something be, and not just for like because it's spectacular and we're gonna, you know, take pictures of the Grand Canyon or something, but like also just these like mundane things that are just kind of left to their own devices. I think a lot about the idea of like a vacant piece of property, right? It's like this idea that something should be there, but it isn't. But then you're like, but there is something there, and that does have value too. It's just.
That's really what it is. Like, it's importance to a vacant piece of land that is, full of native flowers and with native plants and native animals, or even invasives. Like all of those things are part of an ecosystem that we as humans have disrupted for millennia. Before the Europeans were here, Native Americans were also altering not as successfully as we are today, but and just having a place where those things can exist, without bees, we can't have food, where are we gonna have bees or how are we gonna have bees if we cover everything in buildings? So, I don't know, but I think that's what you're right. A lot of it is just like, what can we live in such, a capitalistic environment where everything has a value. A monetary value. And some things I think personally just have an inherent value of being, because they're, I don't know the words, but it's just, it's why we're here. I don't know.
Yeah.
That was a great commercial for my hike.
Oh yeah.
Actually, Palm East is a restoration project for an old golf course that Allen County Park's been doing, and I've been working on this for 10 years.
Oh, nice.
So, I think it's an interesting.
Is it like native species?
Oh, it's everything.
Yeah.
It's historical, it is native, it used to be a swamp, it used to be the Grand River. It's looking at all these different things that have all been done to it, so that's
Cool. If it fits in my schedule, definitely.
I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Highlands over at Rapids. It used to be a golf course, and the neighborhood bought it, and they rewilded it. They tore out all the invasive species and were just letting nature take its course. They brought a stream. They let industry had it buried a long time ago. It has no commercial value, but people love it, and they walk there. It's just, every time I've gone, it's just good for the soul.
Yeah. Well.
I remember going on a county hike some years back and talking about reclaiming land, and I was thinking back in history, kind of your Strata later saying how when our ancestors came here, they were carving a place out of the wilderness that they could live in. And now I feel like we have to carve out a place from the construction so that we can live in it and we can have our higher artistic goals met and our tying in with nature met and everything. If we just keep building on everything, we're going to all be closed in and we won't be doing anything.
I think that was a good way to end it. So thank you again, Sarah, for being here and sharing this really